We meet here today not just with a remarkable person, but for a subject matter that perhaps couldn't be more timely. Perhaps a couple of words to the lady to my left. She is an award-winning novelist and one of Turkey's most prolific writers. She's certainly the most prominent female writer of Turkey, an internationally known writer. Her work has been translated into more than 40 languages. Her latest work is The Three Daughters of Eve, it's called, and it's out now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome once again Elif Shafak.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, Elif, it is no secret that when I say we meet in Brussels here today, it's no secret when I say that EU-Turkish relations have seen better days. Now, as somebody, we just talked about the Brexit before lunch, a country that wants out of the EU. Now we're talking about the country that used to want to get into the EU. As somebody who is Turkish but based in London, you certainly have the view from both sides. What are the biggest misconceptions? Because this is what it's all about, about cultural clashes and misconceptions. What are the biggest misconceptions that Europeans have of Turks and vice versa?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's such a pleasure for me to be here today. And I'm thankful for your generous introduction, very much so. You're so right to underline misconceptions and prejudices which can be found on both sides. But what I can't help but notice is how those prejudices feed each other also. So they are connected, and I'll try to explain. But before that, maybe I should say I've always supported Turkey's EU membership. I still support it. I know it's a pipe dream, and the likelihood of that has diminished in a very sad way. Around the year 2005, 2006, the mood was completely different. And you will all remember there was a moment in which it seemed almost possible that Turkey could become an EU member. It was very close. And it didn't happen for many reasons, and I do criticize the Turkish government for failing to fulfill the EU criteria. But I also criticize populist politicians, especially in continental Europe, for using Turkey as the other in their electoral campaigns, and for being very short-sighted. What we have seen ever since 2006 is a steady decline of Turkish democracy. I am not saying that it happened because Turkey's EU membership did not happen. But what I'm saying is the fact that it did not happen facilitated, in my opinion, the decline in Turkey, the backward decline. So I can't help but notice this steady movement backwards in my country and in my motherland. And of course, it pains me, it breaks my heart. As you underlined, I do live in the UK, I'm based there. It was very interesting for me to witness the Brexit as a Turk, because during the Brexit campaign, the Leave campaign used Turkey as their other. There were signs, when you drive down the road, you would see Turks are coming, 75 million of them. I had very interesting conversations with cab drivers, with grocers, who had fears that Turks would be invading. So to me, it's very sad to see how fear creates extremist politics, and even normally calm and mainstream people can be very prone to fear at times of crisis, political or economic.
And indeed, the reputation, if you will, of Turks within Europe is not necessarily at its highest these days. How to overcome this gridlock that we're in right now? Because it seems clear to me that both sides, both the Turkish and the European sides, actually need each other more than ever in light of many crises that are taking place, not the least, of course, the refugee crisis.
Yes, I mean, we do have to remember perhaps some very simple truths about humanity. Yes, we might be German, we might be Turkish, but we can't be reduced to a single identity. I think all extremist ideologies, at the end of the day, they're trying to narrow down complexity. What they're saying is, are you Muslim? Be a Muslim. Don't be anything else. Are you this? Then just be that. They're always trying to narrow it down. What we have to say, in my opinion, against their solid identity, definition of identity, we have to come up with multiple belongings. Yes, I am an Istanbulite. I'm also a Londoner. Yes, I am Turkish. I have ties with the Middle East and with the Balkans and with the Aegean. And I am a European citizen at the same time with the ideals I share. At the same time, I'm a global soul and the world citizen. So if I can draw concentric circles of belongings, and if the other person can do the same, the chance that those circles may overlap increases. Otherwise, if we have mutually exclusive identity politics, the clash is inevitable. And I do follow the social media, the debates in various cultures. It's very sad how extremists use the prejudices existing in another society to say to their own audience, you see, they don't care about us, therefore come to my side. You know? So every act of prejudice, bias, keeps breeding more bias elsewhere. Extremists create more extremists in another part of the world. They're all connected.
Absolutely all connected, and the European sentiments towards Turks, as we just made it clear, but perhaps to be fair on the other side, the European stock is not necessarily at its highest right now in Turkey as well. I mean, the reputation of Europe as a continent and perhaps as a moral leading force has also withered, hasn't it?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, especially this year before and right around the Brexit discussions, I noticed for many of my British friends or French friends, EU is mostly a financial and economic project. That's how they debate it. Whereas for me, coming from Turkey and as someone who very much believes in the European dream, it is not necessarily a primarily financial project. It's mostly about values. And I do know that those values cannot be taken for granted. We can very well lose those values. We tend to think that history always makes a progressive move forward, but I think history has shown us that time can go backward. It can draw circus and circus. So the values that we take for granted, we may wake up someday and just find out that they're not there anymore. What do I mean by values? So for me, EU is primarily, it's about human rights, it's about democracy, it's about freedom of speech, women's rights, LGBT rights, you know, things that you might take granted in some parts of Europe. I think we have to remind ourselves that, no, all of these rights were the outcome of struggles that took a long time to actualize, and maybe remember the value of those values and try to connect around those values. Diversity is important. We very quickly, and in my opinion, very harshly abandoned the word multiculturalism. It is not a popular word anymore. Nobody wants to use it. Okay, but what did we replace it with? Nothing. What is the replacement of multiculturalism? There's a big vacuum there. For me, cosmopolitanism is important. Diversity is important. I do believe that in this life, if we learn anything at all, we learn it from people who are different from us. It is a big challenge to manage diversity, but if we can do it, the outcome is much better. And I know, coming from Turkey, a country that was once upon a time a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious empire, and that lost its cosmopolitanism, and has, I think, replaced it with a very top-down nationalism and religiosity. I do know that when you lose cosmopolitanism, you lose a lot. Not in financial terms, but from your conscience as well, you lose a lot.
And let's be... And let's speak about the diversity of opinions that are currently taking place and raging within Turkey. I mean, there's no way about it that we don't speak about the increased polarization of the Turkish society as we see it today. Now, you yourself have 1.7 million followers on Twitter, and those followers, I assume, do represent the wide range of opinions of the Turkish society, don't they?
Yeah, it is true. I mean, the social media is very tricky, isn't it? I sometimes liken it to the moon. Just like the moon, it has a bright side. I love the way that it connects people. I think it's far more egalitarian than many other platforms. And to me, it matters that someone living in a relatively remote town in Turkey can connect with someone, you know, miles and miles away. Also, in terms of gender relations, social media is very important because there are interesting surveys across the Middle East when you travel across the Middle East, and Turkey is not a very big exception or not that different either, you go to the cities, go to towns, and you will notice streets belong to men, public squares belong to men, public space belongs to men. But when you look at the internet, especially Facebook and Twitter, half of social media users are women. Women who are not that visible in the public space, they are visible in the digital space. So these things matter to me, and I care about it. Also, in the case of Turkey, we have seen the more the pressure on media, both visual and print media, the more politicized social media became in Turkey. So again, for many of my friends in Britain, Facebook or Twitter may be mostly about personal things, daily life, you know, which movies you've seen, where to eat nice food. But for many Turks, it's a source of information. It's a political platform. Now, on the other side, there's a dark side. It's very open to hate speech, slander. It is incredibly sexist. And very patriarchal domain. It is open to misinformation, slander, and there are no laws regulating that huge chaos out there. I can't help but notice, because I tweet in English and Turkish, whenever I write anything critical about anything in Turkey, let's say gender issues, something political that I criticize, the moment I write it in Turkish, I get some sort of reaction. But as soon as I translate the same thing into English and I tweet the same message in English, then the reaction I get from Turkish users is enormous, because they're saying, okay, but why are you telling it to them? And them means Westerners. Why are you tweeting in their language? As if we are a family, we live in a house, that there might be domestic violence in our house, but we'll just close the door and no one will hear. So that notion of 19th century nation state, it's just, it can't survive in this age, but this is not how people see. You know, nationalism and religiosity, they still think along those tribal lines. They think we are a tribe, don't tell our inner secrets to the other tribe.
So you're in essence being accused of airing the dirty laundry.
Laundry, of course.
To the non-Turkish users out there. Now, since we're winding down, this issue, Turkey-EU relations, will be with us for a long time, regardless of how bad they might be at this point. Yeah. What is it that, since we're in Brussels, what is it that you would like the Europeans to know about Turkey? Because the fixation on one political leader, namely Erdogan, right now, might be taken away from the diversity of opinions within a nation of close to 80 million people. What is it that you want the Europeans to take away from what Turkey is and what the Turkish public is thinking about?
Well, I would like to remind not only you but myself as well, because we can also sometimes forget this, because politics is so dominant in Turkey. It is incredibly masculinist, aggressive and divisive. Turkey has been a polarized country for a long time, but I believe at the moment the level of that polarization is incredibly sharp. And it's lamentable, because we have turned into a nation that can't even grieve together. You know, there have been horrific bombing attacks, terror attacks. We can't even grieve together, and I find that very, very sad. Well, that put aside, I think we have to remember that this is also a very complicated country, very multi-layered, complex, and sui generis, very unique in many ways. So we have to bear in mind that the people are ahead of their governments. The whole country cannot be reduced to one single government or one single politician. And let us not forget that complexity. They're incredibly beautiful minds. Let us not forget women, the subcultures, minorities, people you might not hear that much because their voices are not that loud. But I think a society's nuances and secrets lie in the silences. So let us look at the silenced people as well before judging. I think it's incredibly important to understand that when we come at a crossroads, if Turkey walks away from Europe, if Turkey turns its back to Europe and walks in the opposite direction, obviously this is going to be terrible for Turkey's Democrats and liberals, and we will suffer, but I think it will also be very bad for the region and for Europe. So it's how to encourage a nation to stay close to European values, but at the same time be critical of its politics and politicians. I think we have to make that distinction.
And in light of the ongoing and unfortunately it seems never-ending refugee crisis, the relationship between those two sides are indispensable, to say the least. There are some in Turkey who said, who criticized Europeans for being way too slow on criticizing the coup, the attempted coup. Is that a criticism that you would share? Is that a criticism that you would confirm?
Yes, I think there's some truth in that criticism, in the sense that coup, no doubt, was in my opinion, it was a horrible thing. It was a very bloody, very unexpected, shocking event, and it made everything worse, to be honest. And now we are going through we're seeing the purges, the aftermath. There's a lot of chaos at the moment. You can be critical of governments, but governments at the end of the day are elected by the people. And I have respect for that. So I can be critical, but at the same time I accept their legitimacy. A coup has no legitimacy in my eyes. They come top down and through violent and bloody means, so whoever has done it, in my opinion, should be criticized. And we should not forget that Turkey is a country that went through 3 military takeovers, at least, and several attempts or memorandums. But if you look at those 3 military takeovers in 1960, 1971, and 1980, the third one was worse than all of them. Each coup, I think, pulled Turkey's democracy backwards, decades, and caused massive human rights violations. So there's no way any liberal or Democrat can ever support a coup d'etat.
And before we leave, you started out your remarks by saying that you've always been a proponent, a big believer in Turkish EU membership.
Yes.
Now, to be, wanting that is one thing, but, to be honest, and we're amongst friends here, do you still believe that Turkey will become part of the European Union at some point?
I think it's not a matter of belief. I think we need to keep the dream alive. It is a dream, and I'm aware of that. But to talk about this dream, to talk about this possibility, even when that possibility is at its lowest, in fact, especially when that possibility is at its lowest, because to remind people that we have other choices. Yeah, Turkey doesn't need to go in the direction of Pakistan or Russia or Saudi Arabia. All these alliances that are being now talked about. One thing that maybe people don't realize, politicians are very emotional people in Turkey. As human beings, we're all emotional. But in Turkey, they like to think that women are emotional creatures. I think our politicians are very emotional. So for a long time, the attitude was, okay, if Europe doesn't want us, if Sarkozy doesn't want us, then we don't want them. I have read many analyses with that tit for tat, almost childish, knee-jerk reaction. And sometimes politics can revolve around those feelings, but let us not forget that feelings change very fast. And in a country like Turkey, things change incredibly fast. And maybe that's part of the problem, because every day something new happens, every week something new happens. There's almost never time to stop and analyze and contemplate. Now, the positive note is it might change. This mood might change, but we need to encourage cosmopolitanism. We need to remind people that it's better for Turkey to be attached to European values rather than walking in the other direction.
Well, I think one thing is for certain, the Ankara-Brussels angle will not decrease but increase in importance as we move along many of the geopolitical obstacles and crises that we are facing. Ladies and gentlemen, The Three Daughters of Eve is the latest work of Elif Shafak. It's been a treat, wonderful to have you here. Elif Shafak, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Yeah.